we're underappreciated, right? We don't last more than 16 or 18 months, right?
Mm.
What's the average tenure of a VP of marketing? 2+ years, at least. How many times has the head of product ever been fired for missing their deadline? Never. Never.
Hey, Richard, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Hey, Richard, fill us in as to how you got into the world of sales and tech. So take us back to your early years.
So I'm one of those few people that knew I was probably going into sales. Like I went to college and I knew I was going to do a business major. Both my parents were in sales. My dad sold insurance. How very exciting. And my mom actually sold radio ads, like old school, right? So I think I was always surrounded by this business mindset, the talk of business and sales. And I have very early memories of 5 or 6 talking about owning stock in things like Texaco gas and different things. So this business mind, money mind, revenue mind was always there for me. So I think that was a piece of it. I also knew when I got out of college, I didn't want to go to the corporate world and wear coats and ties. So I decided I'd go work for the Gap, which was my first real job, big jeans and t-shirts.
Yeah.
And that was a sales role, got into management there. And I always knew I'd go into the business side. I didn't know that I would be necessarily sales all the time.
That makes sense. And then what about the switch over to tech?
So tech was a dream thing, right? I always wanted to be in it. If I was really smart, I would have listened to my mother. It was mid-90s. I was living in Denver, working for a company that ran these cool weekly newspapers. This was pre-internet, right? Or right before the internet. And sold ads in the back. Like newspapers used to make money from classified ads, not the big display ads, all the ads in the back. And my mom called me one day and she said, you should go work for this company out in California. She was a stockbroker at this point. And this company, they do something where they make money selling ads. It looks like classified ads. I'm like, who's that? Like Yahoo. And I'm like, I'm not fucking listening to my mother. So anyway, so that happened. And I think I started paying attention to tech a little bit more because of that. She doesn't even remember.
I was going to say, I told you so's you got afterwards, right? Like every Christmas dinner, every
She
Thanksgiving.
doesn't even remember that story. I love telling the story. And then like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I told her that I tell the story. I don't remember that at all. So anyways, I was in software sales, running a educational software team. And I missed the opportunity. Like I was in Denver, then Cleveland and San Francisco with this newspaper, and then went into educational software, and I missed a jump there. I didn't have the confidence to think that I could go to the startup world, even though I had done software, because software was still put on each individual machine or on the network, right? It wasn't SaaS. And I had a lot of imposter syndrome. So I probably missed an opportunity there to go to a Salesforce or something like that. And then just over time, I moved around from one gig to the next and one gig to the next. And the next thing I knew, I landed at this great company called Mashery around 2010, 11. And that was probably my real first SaaS play. And that's where I really got into that's where I really made my bones there. Like that's where I really got it. So anyway, so that's how I got there. So it wasn't necessarily as strategic as a lot of people. The roles didn't quite exist either. There were just sales roles. There weren't really SDR roles, so to speak, at that point, or that was just coming online. Plus I was older. I wasn't 20 something at that point. I was 30 something. So that plays with your mind. So anyway, I'll shut up now, but that's the long version of how I got there.
And then what about the leap into then starting your own business? You mentioned something about imposter syndrome, but then starting your own business, man, that's a whole other leap. How did that come about?
Yeah, there's 2 parts to the imposter syndrome. One is, and we don't have to go there, I'm very big on talking about mental health and my mental health and how I eventually learned to embrace my depression and make it a superpower. That had a lot to do with my imposter syndrome. By the time I decided to start this business, I'd already been through a lot of therapy and medication and stuff like that. I was actually working at this company, Mashery. I was doing okay. I wasn't doing great at it, taking on a couple of different roles for the experience. And then not by choice, I was let go. They were about to get acquired, and they were getting acquired, I think, by Intel, and they didn't need another sales ops person at that point. So they hugged me out the door. They did me really well, good severance, health insurance, knew I had a family, understood what was going on. So I had several months to figure it out. I was going through the whole interview process. I was getting stuck at like the fourth interview. Couldn't get hired. It was really weird. And then one day somebody called me and said, "Can you help with this problem? We want to hire you." And I'm like, "I'm not going to get hired to go and move to Austin. I just wasn't going to move to Austin, Texas." And he said, "Would you do it part-time?" And I threw out this number to consult, and he said, "Yes." And I'm like, "Oh, cool. All right." And then my first week flying back, I sat down on the plane next to this guy in jeans, and I'm not kidding, blue suede shoes and a blazer. Like, this guy's got to be a startup guy. Nobody leaves off on a Friday unless we have to. Start talking, and it was Nick Mehta from Gainsight, which is now a huge company. They were like 15 employees at that point. And we had this amazing 2-hour conversation. And the next thing you know, I had a second client. So here I am. I'm like working off a Yahoo email address, and I've got 2 clients paying me, for 60 days, what I would normally make in 6 months. And I pick up because I was having that impact. I'm like, what is going on? What's happening? And I called a good buddy of mine, John Barrows, who does this. And he's, "Richard, it doesn't work this way. Like, most consultants have to grind it out. Like, you just got yourself all this runway. And I know you can do it." And that's all I needed. And I talked to my wife and I said, let's take, at that point, $5,000 and put it into a validation website to prove my existence. And I was off to the races. Like, that's how it happened. Like, it was never a design or a choice. It just happened, and I'm grateful for it.
Most things in life happen that way, right? Like, you don't really choose it. The path chooses you. But there must have been something about you, Richard, that the likes of Nick and others found charming or enticing to actually get you on the team. So can you look back and go, I knew my shit, even though it may have not come across that way?
It was interesting. So the first client I had, I'd spoken to a year before. And again, I wasn't going to move to Austin. And I had even told him, I'm like, I'm flattered. I said, and I took the conversation in the first place to say, look, I don't know that I would come here, but I'm happy to have a conversation, because I wanted to just see what it was like. Right. And I'd been at this other company, Mastery, for 6 months. And I was like, now someone wants to talk to me because I have this tech experience. Let me see what that's like. So I had this conversation with Brendan, and I just wasn't ready to go anywhere. I'm 6 months in. 1, I don't know that I want to move to Austin. And 2, I haven't finished what I came here to start. And I feel bad about that. So a year later, fast forward a year later, I had been laid off. All of a sudden he wants more help again. Well, my first client told me that, oh, you actually know what you're doing, right? You get it. And then I think and that gave me a big confidence boost. Sitting on the plane, I start talking to this guy named Nick Mehta. I don't know him from Adam. He doesn't know me. He's like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "I'm a consultant." I'm like, "Holy shit." He's like, pulled out my laptop and showed him some stuff I'd worked on. It wasn't very pretty. It was just a Google Doc or whatever. And he's, "Yeah, I need your help." So more or less. But I think, and then from there, what I realized was, and I say this to everybody, just because we know something really well and we think the rest of the world knows it and it seems so obvious to us, they don't always know it. And there's always an influx of new people who don't have that experience yet. And I think it just happened that way. And that's where that first kick of, oh, I can do this makes sense, right? That my knowledge is valuable.
100%. Spending most of our time now in early stage startups and things we take for granted because we've just done it. We've just done it for 9 years, 10 years. You assume everyone just does it, but it's not. It's skill you've picked up, and it's work you put in that gives you some of that knowledge. And that's part of why we started this, right? See if there are ways we can shortcut for other people. They can just hear so many people say the same thing, and then you get that sort of absorption of knowledge from people.
So I'm happy for other people to learn off my mistakes.
Exactly. That's pretty much what we're all doing, right? Hey, learn from what we did wrong.
So talking about mistakes, one of the mistakes we often find, Richard, is that a lot of the startups don't get their playbooks right. So just want to pick your brain a little bit as to how do you define a sales book? What are the good components and what should it have and what should it not have?
It took me a long time to figure this out. This was definitely a mistake. I used to think the playbook was the company history and the product knowledge and all that. That's not a sales playbook in my opinion, right? That's like a recipe book. It's a cookbook, right? A playbook is very specific to use cases, meaning the playbook of what are the best emails, how to write an email. That can go in a playbook. And then if you're going out to a persona, how do you message that persona in a certain way? That part of the playbook evolves though, because what happened last week won't work. What worked last week won't work in an email. Same thing with cold call scripts. In the playbooks I develop, I will talk to a client, say, where are your deals getting stuck? Oh, they're getting stuck in negotiation. Okay, where in negotiation? And I'll often find out that it's not in negotiation, it's back in discovery. So the playbook is then, what are the 10 questions your reps should be asking to qualify need? And then to go 2 layers deep based on those answers. And then what about economic impact or access to authority or timeline? Those are playbooks. Then it gets even more specific on a play of, here's the demo, word for word, script for script. The demo should be 90% the same for everybody. There's wiggle room for authenticity, right? It's the actual, here's how you deliver the demo. It's, here's the script you say before you even do the demo. That's the play. What do I say? How do I pre-qualify the demo? Same thing if I'm actually going to procurement. Here are the conversations and here's how to talk to procurement. That's a play. If you're going to deliver pricing, here are the exact ways to deliver pricing. Here's what you say when they ask for a discount. For me, the playbooks are very tactical for a sales world, as opposed to all this other theoretical stuff. And that's how I see it, right?
Yeah. I'm with you. So let's dig a bit deeper then. I'm an early stage founder, right? I've got some product market fit. I'm now trying to hand this thing off. I've got it to $1 million somehow, some way, with a couple of reps. I'm the one who's written this playbook. It's messy. How do I transition that knowledge to the next layer of leadership, or what should my team look like? So it's a double-fold question.
We just talked about this on our podcast yesterday with someone. And the first thing is to recognize if you're a founder and you're transitioning from founder-led sales to sales, you do not have product market fit. You have some validation, but you don't have fit. No, you need 50 customers to tell you you've got fit, right? A handful isn't going to do it. And a handful of friends and family customers definitely aren't going to do it.
Yeah.
So part of it is acknowledge where you're really at, right? It doesn't mean you're off or you're wrong. It just means you don't have product market fit, because you're going to, when you assume you have product market fit, that's where mistakes start to get made. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in your scenario, as you're describing, I've written down my playbook. I'm like, I don't know any founder who's written any kind of a playbook when they've gone from founder-led sales to sales. There's no play. They haven't written shit. So that's the part where, either a consultant like me or your first head of sales comes in and just grills you and interviews the heck out of you, or listens to sales calls or talks to your customers to help define the value proposition in a way that resonates. The challenge that I see with founders to transitioning out of founder-led sales is that they forget that their earliest customers are buying them, the human, as much as they're buying the product or the service. And so they get frustrated when, why can't sales do it as easily as I do? You walk in with a certain command and authority because you know the product. Oftentimes the founder in this situation is a technical founder, not always, but a lot of times. And so they can answer it in a technical way so people buy into the smartness of this founder, not just what the product or service does.
they've been in the industry and had that problem themselves, and they got someone to build that cake because they had that. So they walk in and go, "I was you. I did this. This is what's happening."
Yeah, I think you said it really well there, Sean. Is they can genuinely empathize because they felt the pain, as opposed to a salesperson who can empathize, but they didn't really feel the pain, and that comes across differently in the conversation, right? That's not a bad thing. That's just the way the founder can position themselves with that person, right?
And then you generally see the
Bodhi.
Yeah, and then if you look at their playbooks, the things they write down, the thing they don't deal with is persona, right? Because they know that's intrinsic to them. They came from that industry. So why would you teach someone that? Like you assume, similar to what we do when we talk to people, you assume they know all these things. When you hire your first group of salespeople, you assume they know your industry.
Yeah. And I also think, now this is an assumption of mine, for the really bright, any founder, in particular the technical founder, it's probably very boring for them to have to sit there and answer questions about why did this persona do it? Why do they like it? Tell me more. Because they're thinking about the product. They're thinking about version 2 and 3 and the coding and what they want it to do. And so I think that becomes a big challenge for those founders in their first go-to-market strategist or sales hires, that getting that information is tougher than people think, and more necessary than they'd like to admit.
Yeah, great point. So would you then say that hiring their first sales leader is often their biggest mistake when scaling a sales org? Founders, that is?
That's a great question. It is not, I don't know that it's the biggest mistake. It's the most misunderstood thing to happen, though. And it's interesting because and I don't know why, and this is an assumption of mine. I would think that if I were a VC, I would teach them how to hire their first sales hire versus let them go figure it out on their own. There's value to that, right? Like I get what the VCs are like, hey, we're investing in you. You need to figure this out. You got to learn on your own. On the other hand, this is such a common problem that I would probably, at least I would like to think that I'd coach them on how to do this, right? Because we already know the problem exists and nobody's actually talking about it. We just let it continue to exist. I know some VCs do that. Like some VCs have that sort of level of resource. I also think sometimes founders themselves don't realize that they think we're turnkey. Any salesperson can do it. If I have an HR thing and anybody who sold to HR, they'll be the right one. Like they always want industry experience over sales experience, which is probably the biggest mistake, right? I can sell anything. You can teach me the product. You can teach me about the industry if I don't know it. But I guarantee you, I can ask questions better than any founder in the world. Guaranteed. Right? Because that's what I've been trained on. Right? That's what I know.
Yeah.
So I think it's a big mistake, and it's a big misfire. It's either done too soon. It's done with the best of intentions, but the wrong understanding. It's not quite as simple as they think it is. And so I don't blame the founders for that. And I don't blame the VCs. I just think it's such a common thing. It's surprising it's still happening.
That's exactly right. Like we're in 2023.
Right.
And from what I can gather, sales is still probably the most underappreciated function of the business. Or perhaps misunderstood.
Let me ask you a question. We're underappreciated, right? We don't last more than 16 or 18 months, right? What's the average tenure of a VP of marketing? 2+ years.
At least.
How many times has the head of product ever been fired for missing their deadline? Never. Oftentimes because the founder's part of that team. So we're very underappreciated. And there's a rationale for that too, of look, you got to bring in the revenue. If you can't close, you can't stay. It's an easy excuse, right? But where's the part about the goals were unrealistic in the first place? Where's the part about you promised me to deliver this product by a certain time and you can't? Or, hey, you just pivoted the product from here to here, so you just blew up my entire pipeline. So it is misunderstood and certainly underappreciated, I think, in many cases.
If you polled software companies and said, is sales misunderstood? I think you'd get a vastly different result, because all the other teams are looking at the sales guys running around and getting their nice big commission checks, and working their hours, doing what they want to do, I think you'd find very different, as the non-salesperson in the room, very different discussion points coming back. But
yeah,
I guess I look at it slightly differently and go, there's a huge volume of people nowadays, in particular over the last 10 years, that flow through sales, right? Through SDRs, VDRs. It's a massive amount of people. And when you go to make these first hires and you go look at experience, there's a heap of people who've gone, I've worked here, here, and here, and I've done this and this. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're actually sales professionals. It just means they've worked in sales jobs. And I think that's where sales has the difficulty that some of the other areas don't have. There's 50,000 people every week going, I have worked at all of these companies and done this for 6 years, but they're not actually sales professionals. I haven't learnt any of the real skill sets that you're talking about, Richard, that you hold. And you say, I could come and sell anything, and you could. But there's probably 20 other people or your colleagues that would go, I could sell anything, but you put them in a room and go, here's what we do. And they're like, give me my script and give me my thing, and I'll be able to do that. But I don't actually have the skill set that you're talking about.
Yeah.
That might be unfair to a lot of people, but that's what I see.
Yeah, I agree. I think tying what you just said back to what we were talking about is it's certainly the most least understood profession. I don't know if it's misunderstood. Yeah. It's either one of those, right? Yeah. One's not a better word than the other. And part of that is because of the negative connotation to the role, right? Yeah. Every person in the world has a frame of reference about a good salesperson or a bad salesperson, right? And we already have so many negative impressions of that. Say the same thing about lawyers or politicians, right? We all have a frame of reference. We all know them. We all see them. And most of our frames of reference, unless they're a friend of ours, is not good for politicians or lawyers. And I think
even my friends is the same reference, mate. Don't worry.
And I think the same is for sales. So we're already fighting an uphill battle to begin with.
Yeah.
And then I'll point out one more thing and then I'll shut up. The other piece of this is that we're really good at what we do about selling ourselves. That doesn't necessarily mean we're good at sales. It means we're good at selling ourselves and we know how to give the answers the other person wants to hear. So I think that's an interesting piece of this. And that's also what leads to some of the negative experiences people have and the negative belief systems about salespeople.
We've had a few recent discussions with people where we're talking about marketing is heavily dataized itself over the last 10 years. And that journey is happening for sales now. There's a lot more data coming into, a lot more science coming behind it. More people like yourself speaking out about it's not just putting a kid in at 17 years old into an SDR role and now they're a salesperson and they're always going to be a salesperson. And there's a whole skill set. There's a whole profession hiding behind sales professional. That's as complex as being a product person or a developer or a marketing team. It's the same as learning all of these skill sets, and there's science behind it, and it's sitting there. And the people who understand that science part, just like any other role, are going to be able to come into your company and transform it. The people who don't and have just worked in roles, and this applies to pretty much every single thing. It's just sales has been the one where there's not as much data sitting. So it's really, did you close win all your stuff? You did? Good. Yeah. Okay, you're good.
Interesting. The data started to show up. We just didn't know how to collate it.
Yeah.
We didn't know how to get to it. Like I'm old enough to remember we didn't count emails. We only counted calls because all we could do was track the calls in the dialer. And it was such a stupid idea because at that point in the early 2000s, emails worked really well. You were able to get through to people. You couldn't really spray and pray like you can now. And again, back to your point, marketing is always about 3 to 5 years ahead of sales in terms of technology. And that's a very interesting play. I never thought about that till many years ago when someone talked about it. And I was like, oh, you're right. Because look, Eloqua and Marketo and all these tools that are out there, been out there for a long time. And nobody really just ever tried to apply it to sales, which was like, how silly are we? Like, how hard is it that we could have created a sales loft or an outreach, not from a coding perspective, but just from the idea, right? You could have thought of that. I could have thought of it. I just didn't. I literally have, from when I first started my consulting business a call coaching scorecard. And a friend of mine's like, you could turn this into a real platform. And I had no clue what he meant. Then came Gong, right? Literally, we're sitting there, you're listening for each parts of these things. And if you hit this, you get this score. And it's like on a Google Doc, and it's not. So it's the technology's there. The ideas for it are already there. And so that would be the thing.
So just emailing a commission check.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Just email the Gong boys a commission check. I had this idea.
Yeah. Here's my royalty check.
Yeah, that's right.
You mentioned a really good point there, Richard. Salespeople are really good at selling themselves. Especially when it comes to the interview process. Totally guilty, having hired hundreds of salespeople over the years. You just get sucked in. You're like, even though you've made the same mistake 10 times over, you're like, yeah, that person sounds like me, has got the same kind of confidence and knowledge set, so therefore must be good. What advice do you give to those founders early on to ensure that team composition and the hiring profile and all of the other stuff that actually matters when you take the subjective nature out of it? How do you actually do that? And how do you do it well?
My buddy Scott says this a lot. Can do versus has done. So if I want to hire a VP of sales, should I really be hiring a VP of sales who's been a VP of sales? Or should I really hire a director who's hungry, who will go figure it out? Right. And if you think about the startup world, that's what a founder was. They were hungry. They're still hungry. Right. And that hunger, to me, in most cases, a little bit younger and earlier, but hungry to earn their VP title versus a VP who's coming in with their ego and going to try and over negotiate salary, who may have never really done anything. The biggest mistake I see founders make in their first sales hire is they go after the pedigree. They go after the VP or Oracle or Salesforce or Zoom or something like that for an early stage startup where nothing's been written, no process has been there. And oftentimes those particular individuals, they just haven't done that in so long, or they never did it, that they forget that's part of the job. Whereas if I've got a director of sales who's a little bit closer to the ground and managing this process and hungrier, then I might go after that person. So I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure if
it does. And I'm fully on board, right? I often write about don't hire big dogs too early. However, on the flip side, you've got a lot of VC partners and the PE firms going, hey, back this person because that person's done it 2 times over. To your point, they may not fucking done anything just because they come from those spots.
Yeah, what I think that means is it's got to be a stage appropriate hire, right? I don't mind. Look, let's say someone does come from a Salesforce and they're a VP of sales. But before that, they worked at 2 other startups that did well. Maybe they got acquired by Salesforce. Now, that person I'd probably heavily consider, because now they have the vision of the here and now and then what it needs to be in 5 years. They have that experience. I wouldn't just throw out someone with a big pedigree just for the sake of that. So I think it has to do with like stage appropriate and what needs to get done. And which then leads to you hire someone, they can do well, they get you to a certain place, and then the VC or the founder comes in and says, oh gosh, you got us to 10 million. I need someone who can get me to 100, and you've never done that, so I'm going to top you off, which is frustrating because it's the same battle. Somebody's got to give me my chance, right? Well, who's going to give me my chance to get it to 100? On the other hand, it's okay, great. I haven't. But I'll stay here and learn from this person because my next story will be, I was there as we went from 0 to 100. Now I know what to do. It's a lot of pieces. So stage appropriateness, I think, is probably the right way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one because to go hire someone who's been a VP at a big company like that, you're giving up a huge percentage of your overall cost that are sitting in your business. Like those people are not cheap. Right. And so stage appropriateness is super important because if they're not going to get out and hit pavement and sell, and you've got an overhead of that sort of dollars sitting there that's actually not generating revenue, you probably only have 2 or 3 or 4 salespeople floating around.
That's also part of why the 18-month thing happens. If you hire me as a VP of sales, this is the other thing of stage appropriate. If someone were going to hire me, like, great, what's my goal? Where are we supposed to be in 4 years? Great. If I get us halfway there in 2 years, I want 60 or 70% of my equity, not 4 years. If I can get you there in 2 years instead of 4, then I earn 100% of my equity, not have to stick around for 4 years. Right. So part of this stage appropriateness is there, because the other thing that happens is everybody knows, and I don't think it's intentional, but we all know that 16 to 18 months is the average tenure. So you're really not giving away that much equity. You're not giving away as much equity as you think you are, because that person's not going to make it that long. Right. And then to the compensation point, yes, that's true. However, if you overpay someone and keep them for 18 months, I'm not sure that's their fault. I think that's the founder's fault.
100%.
And that's hard, right? Because you do want to give these people a chance, and look, everybody's a human, and we want to give people opportunities. So it's easy to say here it's the founder's fault. It may not be. It could be that, again, that sales leader's very good at sales. Maybe they're fucking up shit. We just don't know until it's too late, right? Like that has happened. I've seen it. So I can't say it's always the founder.
Are you a supporter of the 18-month average tenure? Do you think it's a right time frame for? Yeah. Do you like it? Like it's an interesting data point, right? Like someone comes in, they get your sales motion working, things are going in the right direction. Unless things are failing, like 18 months is not a long time.
Yeah.
It's just not a long time in role.
No. And I think part of it is, again, it depends on the stage of the organization and the maturity of the leaders. So there are startups out there where it's someone who's been around and done that. It's their third startup. They've had 2 exits.
Yeah.
They might have a little bit more patience, right? Or they might be better skilled at this point to hire someone to avoid the 18-month problem, right? I don't support it at all and like it. It's just what the data tells us.
I would say those people who've done 1 or 2 understand the value of holding teams, performing teams together, and the uplift you get from the fact that if you've got people that are walking in step and doing the same thing and achieving the same goal, they'll outperform people who've done that 3 times, but aren't actually a part of what is going on, right? The uplift you get from people that are working together for a common goal and believe in it passionately far outweighs everything else. And if you've done it multiple times, you're going to go build that team, and then you're going to keep them together as long as you can, because the acceleration you can get out of that, my view, outperforms all the rest of that stuff.
And that, to me, that's as much about they have the experience to better hire and avoid those missteps they've made or learned, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And we've all done that. Yeah.
As opposed to the 20-something person who's brilliant idea, builds amazing stuff. It seems to make sense in the market, but they don't necessarily have the people skills through no fault of their own. They just don't have those skills yet. They haven't been through that part of life. So and then the other piece of this too is the unrealistic goal setting. Like that is a big piece. That's, hey, let's create these goals. The VP said they could do it. Therefore, if they can't, it's on them. And it's not really, you still came up with crappy goals, right? And what VP is going to say, no, I don't think that's realistic.
Yeah.
No, stick around, right? A good sales leader will sell them on I can get behind it, knowing full well it's not going to work. Right. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
again, I'm a big believer in, if you can get everyone walking on the same step, you're halfway, 3/4 of the way to success. So if your model is you're just going to push down the line, like this is what you do, like, people aren't being a part of building what you're going to achieve then. You're telling them what they're going to achieve. And then you get that situation where people aren't going to come up to you and go, that's bullshit, there's no way I'm going to get there. They're going to be like, yeah, we're going to smash that. We're going to do all the things we can. You want to build that environment where you can actually have those honest conversations with people, go, this is where we want to get to. Can we do that? Can we get that? We've had plenty of conversations, Ricky and I, where it's impossible, we're not going to do it. And we've had to go back and meld it out. And I still think we got it wrong plenty of times, where we still accepted things that were, and I think that's more learning to deal with venture capital and private equity, and understanding that there's no point pushing stuff up the line, and accepting as a whole company to people who are backing you that you can achieve stuff that's probably not going to happen. Right? That's the discussion should happen at budget time, not 3 months down the track. And I've definitely been guilty of that, going, oh yeah, I know we agreed to that, but
yeah. And I think that conversation happens. I think at some point too, though, look, as a sales leader, I can say, look, this feels unrealistic. Our pipeline's already here. Our thing is here. In order to get there, we're going to need these tools, these services, blah, blah, blah. You can position all that. And then that founder and board can say, we can't give you all those things, but you still got to do it anyway. Okay.
Yeah. And we've been there. I've been there. But that's just failure. It's gonna. That means everyone goes in, and the bits I got wrong is I should have just said and put on record. As long as we all agree, we're going to fail. Right? We're saying it now. We've been told I can't get there without this stuff. We're saying, cool, get there anyway. So you've been pre-warned. We're pre-warned that we're not going to get there. Now, whose fault's that? Is that the sales leader's fault? Is that the CEO? So in my case, it was my fault. I was the CEO. I allowed it to happen. So it was my fault.
I think it's less about, this is my maturity coming in, right? It's more about being able to recognize, okay, we both stepped into that one, right? You told me this wasn't going to happen.
Sure.
I made you do it anyway. Again, as the CEO, Sean, if you didn't see Richard still putting in the right level of effort with his team to get 100%. You there, then there's a piece on Richard too. And so the key is, what do we do from here? And so often it's easier to just get rid of the salesperson because I can't get rid of Sean. He's the CEO and the founder. Therefore, we'll go get another VP of sales. And what ends up happening is that new VP of sales gets the break that Richard didn't, but that Richard took a punch in the face for.
I've always been lucky that I've had supportive boards and companies that have backed us. So we were able to have the honest conversation of, we made a mistake and it's too bad. We're actually going to hear and get support and back through. But yeah, I reckon what you said is probably what happens 9 times out of 10, right? Where it's more the other way around. Shoot that person, bring someone in, and then you give them the break that Richard earned when he took the bullet.
On the other side, though, I don't think too many VP of sales also come up to the founders and board to go, actually, we've crushed it for the last 2 quarters. Let's raise the quotas. I don't think that
Why
happens.
would I?
But why wouldn't you? Like 21, 22 was easy selling. Not many people were coming up and going, hey, man, I'm going to crush it for the end of the year.
I think a good VP of sales will, because again, y'all tell me, oftentimes, whenever I was working for a company or even if I was fractional, I still had to put my sales projections together because I need to figure out my head count. I need to figure out my tools and my budget. So it's not like I didn't have a say in the number. And again, now to your point, do I put a slush fund in there and maybe underestimate a little? Probably. Yeah.
A little bit of buffer.
I'd like to think that I'm mature enough not to do that anymore if I were working for an organization, right? Like I would be like, here's the reality, and I could base that reality based on the numbers. And I would create a stretch goal. I think this is where we're at. Here's where I think we can most likely get to, and here's a stretch. The problem is that when it becomes a stretch goal set by that's where the disconnect happens. I think we have more say in our numbers than I think we do. We don't get to make the final decision. And I think it comes down to, this is the part that I like, is learning how to articulate my belief and getting Sean and Ricky to understand why my numbers are the right numbers. And that when Sean and Ricky say, Richard, this is what we have to do because of the funding and the VC, and it's like, okay, does that sound logical? Rather than argue, I might say, so let me get this straight. Somebody outside this room says we have to do it that way. Does that mean you believe them? Logically, you actually believe them? Or does that mean you agree with me, yet you still have to do what they say, which is okay? And that to me is the part that a lot of heads of sales are uncomfortable saying, right? And it's not meant to be offensive. It's to just say, wait a minute, let's put real rationality around this.
And the increase of data you're getting in sales now is making this even more powerful, right? Because you've got so much data to show pipeline and where everything's sitting to be like, okay, cool, you want me to get here. Here's the numbers. Here's where the numbers would have to be to get to what you want. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, it's like this. One of my kids, I've got 13 and 15-year-old. They each have scooters, like Uber scooters, right? Like a legit scooter. One of my kids wants to get one of the motorbikes, not a motorcycle, but like and I'm like, no, it goes too fast and it's unsafe. And I give him all this rationale, and then he comes in with this emotion, but because, and my friends, and the this and the that. And it's funny. When you're off the payroll and you graduate college and you pay your own insurance and your own rent and all, you can buy whatever the fuck you want. Go buy a motorcycle. I don't care. But right now, no. And so it's the same kind of push-pull dynamic I see between boards and heads of sales and revenue.
That's a good analogy. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah. I just came up with that one, actually.
That will be the headline of this podcast episode. Richard, want to change up the subject a little bit? I saw your heartfelt LinkedIn post last week. I think it was all about, guys, enough is enough. Come back to desk. I want bums on the seat.
Yeah. I basically said, everybody's coming back to the office. And if you want to be hybrid, that's fine, but you have to be in the office Monday and Fridays.
That's the 2 days I take off. Work from home.
Really? Really? That's why? Give me a fucking break. The irony of it is, and I know a lot of people, I remember back in the day, if I got out of work at 3:30 on a Friday, it was like a long weekend. It was like, holy cow. So what's your question? Yes. So I did write
the
this
question
post.
Is what made you put that post up? Because it wasn't just for impressions.
No, it was intentional because these conversations are happening.
Yeah.
And I was very specific not to say, I didn't want to be soft. I wanted to be harsh about it because it's coming. We're recording this on September 27th. And
we're in the future, man. 28th here.
28th for you. What's going to happen? October 1st, companies are going to start telling employees that come January 1st, you're back in the office. And they're going to tell you again November 1st and December 1st. And if you go find this post and read the comments, people are irate at me. There's a couple of them in there that I love that I won't repeat, but I left them in there because people need to decide what they need to do for themselves. And I don't want someone to get this notification on December 1st, having never thought about it. Yeah. All of a sudden, holidays are here. They're supposed to travel. Now they're stressed out that they're going to have to go back to the office January 4th. I don't have time to figure out babysitters and all this stuff. So the whole point was to get people talking about it because right now it's happening at a high level. It's in the news and it's happening in the executive boardrooms, but it's not happening at the rep level. It's not happening at the employee level. And everybody can sit here and say, I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit. Go for it. You should. I'd start looking sooner than later because there's going to be a whole bunch of other people looking, right? That doesn't mean I support it. I like the idea of being in the office. I am one of those people who enjoyed being in the office, the camaraderie and all those things. I see the altruism of, gosh, when people are in the office, that supports the small businesses around the offices in the cities, right? Everything from dry cleaners to restaurants to even the little 7-Eleven or corner store. And it does support the cleaning crews and the security people and people who, those aren't the most glamorous jobs, but they're working too to make a living to take care of their family. So there's an altruistic piece of this. I don't think we're ever going back there. I don't think that's going to happen. If it does, it'll be 2025 at the earliest. So I wanted people to start thinking about it because I'm not concerned about me. I'm concerned about the single mom of 2 kids, right? Who has created this flexible plan to take care of her kids and work from home and be successful and get it done. Not, look, I'm lily white. I've got a wife. We've got 2 kids. It's pretty easy for us in this world, right? I run my own business. I don't work for somebody else. Like
you can work where you want. So
yeah. So those are the people I'm concerned for, or the families where they do have 2 working parents. And because there's this flexibility of working from home, they don't have to pay as much for childcare or the commute dollars or all these other things. I want people to start thinking about this and having this conversation with themselves and their loved ones and their friends to go, what's my math? What's my number? And I also want, sorry, I'm going to rant a little bit more and then I'll shut up. I also want the leaders to understand what this means, right? The first people to generally leave are the best people, the brain drain.
Yeah.
And I just read a study yesterday. There's a study, I think by Stanford, that says that for the last 2 years, last year, they've really been done all these surveys and whatever. And if I remember correctly, it said the average person will forego $8,000 in money for the flexibility to work from home. That's a good thing for everybody, right? My happiness is I'd rather work from home and be happier. If the company wants to pay a little less because someone's working from home, right? Plus the real estate, there's less overhead. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So I'm talking about it because I want people to talk about it, right? And
I'm
a
glad
lot of people at this point, they thought I was saying it like, oh, Rickard's telling everybody he thinks everybody should go back to the office and shut up.
It's a very emotional charged topic, right? It's become, what we do as humans. Once we pick a side, to pick or say anything that doesn't sound like it's on that side brings anger and hate and disgust and attacks. But it's a legitimate discussion, right?
I had one person text me and said, I think you're on the wrong side of history based on that post. And I know that person very well. And I was like, really? Like the wrong side of history? Like that's
what people do. That's how passionate we get about stuff. And then we become, it's you're on the side or you're not on the side. And therefore you have lost. And
we've siloed ourselves.
Which is dumb. I'm old. So I much prefer to be in the office and I like everyone in the office. I am fully transitioned to the other side where I'm pretty comfortable, and businesses I was running had all moved into pure hybrid models. Some of them were working 4 days, not 5 days. I'm on the very futurist side of how people should be working as opposed to looking at 9 to 5. I was more, and I am more now, about output rather than where and what people are doing. But that's just me personally. I don't think there is a right and wrong to this. Every company's going to have different needs, but I do empathize with what you said about city centers, because you go around cities now and some of that vibrancy is gone because not as many people are going through. So traffic is not getting through. So some of the revenues disappeared. Like, that is sad to some extent. And there's got to be some ways that we can help fix that as big businesses.
Yeah, I don't know the answer, right? I think the challenge is going to be that the companies that demand it in a way that's uncomfortable for the employees are going to lose their best employees, and they're going to have a hard time finding and replacing them.
Yeah.
And it's not because of a reputation or culture thing. It's going to be because the population isn't big enough to support the number of people looking for jobs. I'm sorry. There's not enough people. Yeah. There's not enough people to backfill physically. Right. So it's interesting.
All the new ones coming through, they're looking for that hybrid lifestyle. It's not the same as 30 years ago where you want a job and you want to build yourself a career. Like, they want all of it, which I'm still a firm believer. If you're on the earth for 100 years, you got to make the most of it and enjoy as much as you can. So I get the drive. That's why I like hybrid. I still like people coming in. The beauty of having some people together at least a couple of times in a week, and the joy people get from spending some time with each other and going out for lunch and having a beer at lunchtime with your friends. There's power in that. There's growth.
I think that's true. I don't know. I haven't been there. My concern is that's the picture we want to paint. Is that the reality though? Or does it really mean you show up in the office and you're in fucking meetings in a conference room all day? And I don't know. I don't live in that world. So
yeah. Used to be my complaint. I'd go to the office and I'd spend the whole day in my office on calls.
Right.
Yeah. I could have done this at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other challenge is the execution of it. I read, I think it was Salesforce put out something recently. We want developers to be in 10 days a quarter, but we want go-to-market teams coming 4 days a week. So already when you do that, you create further segregation, you create further silos, and it creates this massive upheaval about us versus them. It's got to be one rule for all. You can't have like different things for different roles.
Yeah, it's interesting because there was a quote from Benioff. He even said the other day, CEO, founder of Salesforce, I was never an in-office person. I'm not an in-office person. I don't like to be in the office. But I think our sales teams need to be in the office. And that was one of the prompts of me writing that post last week, was like, there's going to be a lot of hypocrisy. Interestingly and ironically, Zoom has made the back to office demand, right? It's only going to take 2, 3, or 4 more big companies, particularly in tech, to make this a requirement that all the small companies are going to start to do it, with the exception of the small companies who really genuinely don't care. I think that'll be the interesting thing. Like this next crop of startup founders, right? The ones who are working on their stuff right now in 2023 for 24, and they're going to start growing. And they've already been remote homing from school for 2020, right? And they've already built that world in their existence. They aren't going to.
No, we've spoken to founders and CEOs. They built the whole business remote. Their whole culture is built around it. So they haven't had, and the power is they didn't have to do the transition of you build a culture around everyone's together and doing this stuff. And then you transition to this hybrid and probably didn't do a great job of that. And then now you're like, oh, there's an opportunity to bring it all back to what we used to be. The ones who've built it always that way, they're happy. They love it. Their culture is great. They've built inclusiveness around the fact that we are remote, and their whole model is built around that. It's hard if you've got a $50 million building sitting 3/4 empty and you've moved remote because you sit looking at that $50 million building. That's burning a hole in my back pocket.
The problem, though, is whether someone's in that office or not, you're still paying that $60 million.
Yeah.
If it's going to harm your productivity to bring people back to the office, you're going to lose top people, then it's not worth it.
That's what it was. But if you didn't have the $50 million building, you could bring everyone together 3 times a year. And it might cost you $50 million. It's the same thing, but you get that time together, that generation. So they have I think they have an advantage that some of the others don't have, to be able to maintain that, but still get some of those benefits of bringing people together and having some cross-functional connections that you get within organization and allowing you to build a career front-facing, because you do get time with everyone where, you know, all the best stuff in building a career happens after 5 o'clock or before 8 a.m. when you're actually having real conversations with someone and they go, wow, that person really loves this. They really put the work in. They really understand it. And then you can identify and move. Like, that stuff can still happen remote. It's just got to be able to give people the opportunity to get there and do it.
Yeah, I agree. There's lots of positives to in-office. There's the mentorship. There's the ability that if you're seen more often, you're going to be the last person to get fired. There's the altruistic pieces of it. There's a ton of reasons of good things. I think the challenge is that, I think Scott said it today. He said that the problem is there is zero trust between the employee and the employer. The employer doesn't trust the employee, particularly salespeople, to do their job, and they never have. And now the employee doesn't trust the company that I'm going to be around all the time. And so that erosion of trust is a big part of this challenge of work from home, return to office piece. And I don't want it to happen. The only way I ever see return to office happening in full, the only way is if we go through a really massive 2008 type recession and people are like, fuck, I got to take the job. I'll just go do it. And as long as they have to do that, then that could reinstigate it. On the other hand, everybody now has the ability to have a side hustle. So even then that might not work. Right? And so I'm not suggesting it has to go back to the office. I'm just saying those are the things I think it would take. It would take something equally massive to the pandemic in the reverse fashion. People back to the office.
Yeah. And the really smart companies will stay hybrid and attract the best of the talent to them. But you'll only have so many roles to do that. It'll be interesting. I hope it doesn't happen. I don't know if I'm ready for another reverse pandemic or anything like that. I think one was enough.
Yeah. No more pandemic.
Now
that we got it. It's not right.
And I do not want another 2008 recession. I got hit hard on that one. So
Hey, now that we got light-hearted stuff out of the way, let's move to quick fire round, Richard. Every guest that pops on, we ask them similar questions. So easy one to kick off.
Favorite sports team.
My bad.
Oh, this is embarrassing. It's the Denver Broncos because we're just terrible.
Man, Russell Wilson. What did you guys do there?
That's why you can't call someone your favorite team unless you live with them through bad times.
This has the West Coast Eagles, right? Which currently is in Australian football was the worst team in the league for the year. And everyone's like, well, I'm like, because if you support a team, you live the good and you live the bad, right?
Yeah.
I wear as much West Coast Eagles clothing every day as I can just to make sure people know that one day will be good again. It'll happen.
A favorite music genre, Richard?
Rock and roll.
Yes.
Nice.
I like that. I think you're the first person to say rock and roll.
Oh,
maybe we've had two. Second. Yeah.
Second.
I've had 2.
Yeah.
That makes me really old.
Yeah. I think Ricky cherry picks hip hop people. That's what I reckon's going on.
I do not.
I could say EDM and be cool.
Yeah. That's right.
That's right.
We'll do that. We'll cut out the rock and roll piece and we'll just put this in. What about favorite movie of all time, Richard? You got one?
Favorite movie of all time is probably Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, yeah.
That's 2 in a row.
Yeah.
That's a good one. My son's a huge movie buff, so I'm watching tons of movies now. He went to Hollywood for a film camp this summer. That's what he thinks he wants to do. I'm certainly seeing a ton more movies these days, but that one sticks out a lot to me. And probably Casino with De Niro and Pesci and those guys. And Goodfellas. Those are my 3.
Nice.
It's taking
good
1.
movies. What about favorite place to visit or a place that you haven't been to yet?
Australia's on the list of places I want to go.
Yeah.
You haven't been?
Good way.
Yeah. So Emily likes to surf. We love to surf. We surfed in South Africa this year. Australia, I think, is not just for surfing, but I think it's a great place. I want to go back to Greece. There's a ton of places to go.
Yeah, nice. And this is the main question. This is what the whole podcast is designed for. You can't get it wrong. There's only one right answer. How do you like your peanut butter? Crunchy or smooth?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm a smooth guy these days.
You can get it wrong. See,
I'm a smooth guy these days.
Yeah, as a kid, I loved crunchy. And as for some whatever reason, here's why. Because it's too fucking hard to spread the crunchy peanut butter. Dude, I'm a salesperson.
Just eat it out of the jar.
Second counts.
Dip a spoon. Eat it straight out of the jar.
No, I like my peanut butter and jelly tortillas smooth. Smooth like the top of my head.
Wow. Thank you, Richard, for coming on the show, man, and sharing all your insight. This has been fun.
It's been great, guys. It flew by. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for asking me to do it, and thanks for accommodating time.